Sri Lestari. Sri's parents were batik traders and financially well off. However, because of their involvement with the Communist Party, they were both arrested in 1965. Sri was arrested herself shortly thereafter, transferred to Wirogunan prison, and detained for 3 years. Today she lives in Yogyakarta with her husband and children. They used to rent out rooms to boarders, but their house was destroyed during the earthquake in Yogyakarta in 2006. They now rely on their laundry service business to make ends meet. Sri Lestari cannot recall much about her past, as her memory is beginning to fade. But she told AJAR, "I want to forget and not discuss what happened before." Sumila. Sumila was 14 years old when she was detained in 1965, along with roughly 50 other people from nearby villages. She was held in squalid conditions and beaten until she fainted, in an effort to get her to confess to being a member of GOANI, Gerakan Wanita Indonesia, the Indonesian women's movement. She was eventually moved to Bulu prison in Semarang, and then to Pelantungan camp in Kendal. This camp held at least 500 women prisoners. There she learned that she had been taken by mistake. The police had been looking for another woman named Sumila. Today she lives with her son, selling satay and curry near the Prambanan temple in Yogyakarta. Sri Wahyungningsih. Sri Wahyungningsih, known as Nick, was an artist, a ketropak singer, dancer, and actor with Lekra, Lembaga Kebudayaan Rakyat, a cultural organisation associated with the Indonesian Communist Party. She was detained in 1965 and moved from one detention centre to another, including the notorious Jefferson Building, where she was tortured. Nick was eventually sent to Bulu prison in Semarang for 5 years, sleeping in a room with up to 60 other women. Released in 1970, she returned home to find her house inhabited by another family. Now homeless, she lived on the streets until she found a job as a cook for a priest. In 1976, she started selling fried food and small snacks. She currently lives with her nephew in South Yogyakarta. Oni Ponira. Oni was 17 when she was arrested in 1965. She was never charged with a crime and was moved from prison to prison until her release in 1979. She currently lives in Yogyakarta with her husband, an artist and fellow survivor of 1965. They rely on proceeds from selling phone credit and support from their children to meet their economic needs. She told AJAR, "I was told I was only being taken in for questioning. It turns out that I was held for 14 years, from 1965 until the end of December 1979. We never got justice. I hope the government will apologise to the victims." Christina Sumarmiati. Christina, known as Mamik, had just completed her teacher's training when she was first arrested in 1965. Although she was quickly released, she was arrested again in 1968 and detained along with her father and brother. She was taken to the military police headquarters in Yogyakarta, where she was tortured, and then moved to Wirogunan jail, where she was detained without trial until 1971. In 1971, she was moved to Pelantungan camp with 500 women prisoners from Java. She was released in 1978, and she met and married a fellow political prisoner. Banned from resuming her career as a teacher, she started a kiosk selling household goods alongside her husband's small service station. Hartiti. Hartiti had just given birth to her fourth child when her husband, a railway worker and trade unionist, went to work and never came home. She was arrested herself in 1966 and moved to different detention centres. While she did not suffer physical torture, the loss of her husband and separation from her children caused Hartiti immense pain, especially because one of her children passed away from an illness while she was detained. She now supports herself by making and selling pillowcases with decorative embroidery and occasionally helping students find boarding house accommodation. She has yet to find out what happened to her husband. She remembers, "My first child was old enough to understand her mother's suffering. She thought about it until she died. She also often heard news about me. She died because she heard people say things that hurt her." Kadmiyati. Kadmi was studying at the Teachers' College in Yogyakarta in 1965 when she, along with 10 neighbours, was taken from her house and sent to Camp Bantul. She was released in 1966, but detained again in 1968. After her release, Kadmi married and began working as a seamstress and working with her husband, selling vegetables in the market. Kadmi currently lives with her children and grandchildren, sewing in her workshop, raising chickens, and helping with her grandchildren. She asks, "When will there be justice? Who is sadistic and cruel? The communists or the perpetrators of the killings? Find out the truth." Juwaria. Juwaria is the sister of Subi. She was 7 years old in 1966 when her father was exiled to Buru Island. She was sent there 8 years later along with her family. When she was 18, Juwaria married a political prisoner as part of a mass wedding organised by the military in 1978. The newlyweds were made to swear that they would never leave Buru Island. They raised 2 daughters, but her husband passed away. After her husband's death, she remarried, but her second husband was violent and aggressive. The marriage only lasted 2 years. Juwaria now lives in a house bought for her by her daughters, both of whom have found success and received a good education. Nyabinem. Nyabinem is the mother of Hartini and Sudarsini. In 1965, she was left to care for 3 young children when her husband and brother were arrested and taken to Buru Island. In 1974, she was urged to join her husband in Buru, so she travelled with her 4 children and elderly mother to join her husband on the island. When all political prisoners were freed in 1979, Nyabinem's family chose to remain on the island, along with some 200 families, as they had nothing in Java. On Buru Island, they were given a plot of land and rice fields. In her old age, she worries that her land may be taken back by the indigenous people of Buru Island, especially after the discovery of gold on the island. She told AJAR, "When my husband was taken to Buru, I often couldn't sleep at night. I thought about my children at their grandmother's house. My heart was anxious, my thoughts erratic. I could only pray to God to provide a way out. I wanted to live together with my husband and children in one house again. That was my constant prayer." Rodia. When Rodia's father was arrested, she and her family struggled to feed themselves. She soon dropped out of school. Her family joined her father on Buru Island in 1972, when Rodia was 13 years old. On the island, Rodia was still unable to go to school as she had to help care for her younger siblings. In the early days on Buru, her family still struggled to provide enough food for themselves. She and the other women in the community lived in fear of the guards. Rodia married a political prisoner on Buru Island at a mass ceremony organised by the military. Her husband is a musician who was detained as a young man in 1965. Although she previously had a successful business selling yellow rice, she now struggles with her health. She relies on her husband to take care of her and her children. Sri's family was sent to Buru Island when she was 15 years old. She was married 5 years later to a political prisoner. Sri has made a living for her family by making tempeh and bread, which she sells at the AJAR market. Sri suffers from back problems, which she attributes to the hard physical work she had to do as a young teenager. In 1999, religious violence erupted throughout the Moluccas, including Buru Island. Islamic militants attacked the non-Muslim families in Savanajaya, including Sri's family. This event was especially traumatic for Sri. She sold her land and returned to Java, but she didn't remain there long because she couldn't find work. She now lives again on Buru Island with her husband and her children. Lasinem. Lasinem's husband was arrested and tortured in 1969 and eventually sent to Buru. She struggled to care for her young children, who were only 3 and 1 when her husband was detained. In 1972, she and her son joined her husband on Buru, and they remained there after he was freed in 1979. Today, Lasinem sells bean sprouts and surplus rice at the market and raises and sells chickens. Miguelina Marcos. Miguelina, who goes by Net, was detained during the violence of 1965, along with both of her parents and her siblings. Her father and younger brother were both disappeared. Her sister was detained in Bali for 3 years. After struggling for years without work or income, she lives today in a house inherited from her parents. She supports herself by sewing and selling cakes. She believes that God has given her a long life so she can testify about what happened to her family and be a voice for truth and justice.